This constant cycle of military innovation led to the creation of ever more advanced and deadly weapons, contributing to the arms race and shaping military strategies for decades to come. While the Cold War arms race was defined by a competition for military and technological supremacy, it was also a battle for ideological dominance. The US and the Soviet Union were not just competing for military power, but also for global influence. Each sought to spread their political and economic systems to as many countries as possible, often through indirect means such as military aid, political pressure, and covert operations. The arms race, with its focus on technological advancements and the threat of nuclear conflict, became a central element of this broader struggle for ideological control. Both sides viewed the other system as a threat to their way of life, making the stakes of the Cold War incredibly high and contributing to the sense of urgency surrounding the arms race. The ability to build a superior military, including advanced nuclear capabilities, became a way of asserting dominance in a world where global influence and ideological supremacy were constantly at odds. As the Cold War progressed into the 1980s, the arms race reached its peak, with both the United States and the Soviet Union maintaining massive stockpiles of nuclear weapons. The threat of nuclear war was never more tangible, and the global atmosphere was charged with tension. The Reagan administration in the U.S. pushed for a renewed military buildup, bolstered by the belief that military strength could force the Soviet Union into submission. This period saw the development of new technologies, such as the Strategic Defense Initiative, SDI, often referred to as Star Wars, which sought to create a missile defense system that would protect the U.S. from Soviet nuclear missiles. While the SDI was never fully realized, it added to the already intense competition between the two superpowers and placed significant pressure on the Soviet economy, which was struggling to keep pace with U.S. military advancements. On the Soviet side, the arms race was becoming increasingly unsustainable. The Soviet economy was in decline, and the military-industrial complex was draining resources from other vital sectors of the economy. By the early 1980s, it was clear that the Soviet Union could not continue to maintain the level of military spending necessary to keep up with the U.S. without risking economic collapse. This created a situation in which the Soviet Union had to find a way to reduce the pressure of the arms race. In 1985, Mikhail Gorbachev became the General Secretary of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, and his reforms, including glasnost, openness, and perestroika, restructuring, signaled a shift in Soviet policy. Gorbachev recognized that the arms race was a significant burden on the Soviet economy and sought to negotiate arms reduction agreements with the United States. One of the most important milestones in the arms control process during this period was the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces (INF) Treaty, signed in 1987. This treaty marked the first time in history that both superpowers agreed to reduce their nuclear arsenals. The INF Treaty eliminated an entire class of nuclear weapons, ground-launched missiles with ranges between 300 and 3,400 miles, and set a precedent for future arms control agreements. The treaty was hailed as a significant step toward reducing the threat of nuclear war and demonstrated that both the US and the Soviet Union were willing to make concessions to prevent further escalation of the arms race. The signing of the INF Treaty also came at a time when the global political climate was shifting. The Cold War was showing signs of winding down, with the Soviet Union facing internal pressures and a changing geopolitical landscape. The growing economic problems of the USSR, combined with the desire for political reform within Eastern Europe, played a role in this transition. The fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989 and the subsequent collapse of communist regimes across Eastern Europe signified the end of Soviet dominance in the region, and ultimately, the end of the Cold War. As the arms race wound down, the reduction in tensions between the US and the Soviet Union paved the way for the eventual dissolution of the Soviet Union in 1991. The end of the Cold War marked a significant shift in global security dynamics. The threat of nuclear war, while still present, diminished considerably with the end of the ideological rivalry between the US and the Soviet Union. The arms race, which had been the defining feature of Cold War military strategy, began to lose its relevance as both nations shifted their focus toward other global challenges. The world entered a new era, with arms control and nuclear non-proliferation becoming central concerns for international security. Despite the reduction in the number of nuclear weapons and the overall de-escalation of the arms race, the legacy of the Cold War arms race continues to shape global security policies today. While the US and Russia have engaged in arms reduction agreements like the New START Treaty, nuclear weapons remain a key aspect of global military power. The Cold War arms race also left behind a legacy of military technology and infrastructure that continues to influence the military strategies of countries around the world. The race to achieve technological superiority and maintain military dominance, particularly through nuclear weapons, remains an enduring feature of international relations in the post-Cold War era. However, the lessons learned from the dangers of the arms race during the Cold War continue to serve as a reminder of the importance of arms control, diplomacy, and the pursuit of peace in a world still fraught with nuclear threats. The end of the Cold War and the conclusion of the arms race didn't immediately result in a peaceful global order. The collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991 did signify the end of a major geopolitical rivalry, but it also ushered in new complexities and challenges, particularly in the realm of nuclear weapons. While nuclear disarmament became a central goal for both the United States and Russia, the end of the arms race didn't fully eliminate the dangers posed by nuclear weapons. The stockpiles of both superpowers still held immense destructive potential, and the task of managing these arsenals, particularly in a post-Soviet Russia, became a global concern. The 1990s saw the United States and Russia agree to a number of important arms reduction treaties, including the Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty, START-I, signed in 1991. This treaty focused on reducing the number of strategic nuclear warheads and delivery systems, effectively limiting the number of deployed ICBMs, submarine-launched ballistic missiles, and heavy bombers. START-I set a target of reducing the total number of strategic warheads to 6,000 for each side, a substantial cut from the tens of thousands of warheads held at the peak of the Cold War. This reduction, though important, didn't eliminate nuclear threats, it simply reduced them to more manageable levels. While START-I marked a significant step forward in arms control, the post-Cold War era introduced a host of new challenges related to nuclear nonproliferation. The collapse of the Soviet Union led to concerns over the control and security of nuclear weapons, particularly the legacy of Soviet-era nuclear materials and technologies. Several former Soviet republics, including Ukraine, Kazakhstan, and Belarus, inherited nuclear weapons after the Soviet Union's dissolution. The task of ensuring these nuclear arsenals didn't fall into the wrong hands was a significant concern for the United States and its allies. The Nunn-Lugar Cooperative Threat Reduction Program, initiated in 1991, sought to assist former Soviet republics in securing and dismantling their nuclear arsenals. This program was vital in preventing nuclear proliferation and reducing the risks of nuclear weapons being misused. In the following decades, the US and Russia continued to engage in arms reduction efforts, culminating in the New START Treaty, signed in 2010. The New START Treaty further limited the number of deployed strategic nuclear warheads to 1,550 for each side, a major reduction from the Cold War peak. This treaty, still in force today, is seen as a critical element of global efforts to prevent nuclear war and maintain international stability. However, challenges remain. While the US and Russia have made progress, new geopolitical tensions have emerged, including rising nuclear threats from countries like North Korea and Iran, both of which have pursued nuclear weapons programs despite global condemnation and efforts to prevent their proliferation. Beyond the direct US-Russia relationship, the arms race during the Cold War also had a lasting impact on the global arms control framework. The Nuclear Non-Proliferation Regime, particularly the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons, NPT, which came into effect in 1970, continues to play a crucial role in efforts to prevent the spread of nuclear weapons. The NPT aims to prevent the acquisition of nuclear weapons by states that do not already possess them while promoting the peaceful use of nuclear energy. However, the treaty faces significant challenges. Countries like North Korea have withdrawn from the NPT, citing their desire to develop nuclear weapons as a deterrent against perceived threats. Meanwhile, Iran's nuclear ambitions have been a source of tension for years, with concerns over the country's nuclear program continuing to dominate international diplomacy. In the modern world, the lessons of the Cold War arms race remain relevant. The intense competition between the US and the Soviet Union during the Cold War demonstrated both the dangers of nuclear weapons and the necessity of diplomatic efforts to prevent their use. While the arms race led to the creation of devastatingly powerful weapons, it also spurred significant advancements in arms control and nuclear diplomacy. The fear of nuclear war was a constant feature of the Cold War, but it also prompted an unprecedented effort at arms reduction and prevention. The continued existence of nuclear weapons, however, remains a significant challenge to global security. As technology advances and new nuclear powers emerge, the potential for nuclear conflict persists. The Cold War arms race taught the world many lessons, not only about the destructive capabilities of nuclear weapons but also about the importance of cooperation, dialogue, and negotiation in ensuring peace. As global tensions continue to simmer, the need for arms control agreements and disarmament initiatives is as crucial as ever. The Cold War may be over, but the work of securing a future free of nuclear threats continues. The arms race of the Cold War left a lasting impact on global security, shaping the way nuclear weapons are viewed and managed in the post-Cold War world. The sheer scale of nuclear proliferation during this period has created a world in which nuclear weapons are considered both a powerful deterrent and a dangerous liability. Although the Cold War itself ended with the dissolution of the Soviet Union in 1991, the legacy of the arms race still resonates in international relations and security policies today. One of the most significant consequences of the Cold War arms race is the ongoing debate surrounding nuclear disarmament. The threat of nuclear war that loomed over much of the 20th century, though diminished, has not disappeared entirely. As of today, 9 countries possess nuclear weapons: the United States, Russia, China, France, the United Kingdom, Pakistan, India, Israel, and North Korea. While efforts to curb nuclear proliferation have had some success, countries like North Korea and Iran have pursued nuclear weapons programs, despite global opposition and efforts to prevent them. North Korea's nuclear weapons tests, in particular, have highlighted the challenges of maintaining the nuclear non-proliferation regime in the face of defiant states. The persistent risk of nuclear escalation, coupled with the inability to prevent the spread of nuclear weapons to new states, underscores the complexity of global nuclear security. While the Cold War arms race is largely associated with the US and the Soviet Union, its impact was felt worldwide. The nuclear arms race prompted a global rethinking of military strategy and defense policy. During the Cold War, the concept of mutually assured destruction, MAD, served as the cornerstone of the nuclear balance of power. Both superpowers possessed enough nuclear weapons to destroy each other many times over, which theoretically made a direct military confrontation between them impossible. The logic of MAD, however, was not universally accepted, and many countries questioned the safety and ethics of maintaining vast arsenals of weapons capable of wiping out entire populations. As a result, international efforts to prevent the spread of nuclear weapons gained momentum. The Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons, NPT, which came into force in 1970, played a critical role in limiting the spread of nuclear weapons. The treaty aimed to prevent the further development of nuclear weapons by non-nuclear states while promoting the peaceful use of nuclear energy. By creating a framework for cooperation among nuclear and non-nuclear states, the NPT sought to strike a balance between preventing proliferation and fostering peaceful nuclear cooperation. However, the treaty has faced challenges, particularly from countries that have sought to develop nuclear capabilities outside of the NPT framework. The NPT also created a division between the 5 recognized nuclear states, the US, Russia, China, France, and the UK, and the countries that do not possess nuclear weapons, leading to criticism that the treaty perpetuated an unjust nuclear hierarchy. The Cold War arms race also set the stage for new forms of warfare and military technology. The US and the Soviet Union were not only locked in a battle of nuclear weapons, but also a race to develop new types of conventional military hardware. Both sides invested heavily in advancing their air forces, naval fleets, and ground troops, while also developing increasingly sophisticated missile defense systems. The Cold War era saw the creation of long-range bombers, advanced fighter jets, and missile defense technologies, all of which had significant implications for global security and military strategy. In addition to military hardware, the Cold War arms race also spurred advances in intelligence and surveillance technologies. The need for both sides to gather intelligence on the other's military capabilities led to the development of advanced spy satellites, reconnaissance aircraft, and intelligence networks. The US and the Soviet Union engaged in a relentless effort to gather information on each other's military readiness, with both sides investing heavily in espionage. The U-2 spy plane incident of 1960, in which a US aircraft was shot down over the Soviet Union, epitomized the dangers of this intelligence war and highlighted the precarious balance of trust that existed between the two superpowers. Despite the end of the Cold War, the arms race continues to influence the world today. The legacy of the Cold War arms race has created a nuclear landscape in which the presence of nuclear weapons is accepted, but the dangers associated with them remain ever present. The issue of nuclear disarmament is still a focal point in international relations, with efforts to reduce nuclear stockpiles and prevent the spread of nuclear weapons continuing to drive diplomacy. At the same time, the rise of new technological threats, such as cyber warfare and advanced missile defense systems, has further complicated the arms control landscape. Ultimately, the Cold War arms race serves as a reminder of the delicate balance of power in global security. While the risk of nuclear conflict may have lessened, the lessons of the Cold War, particularly the dangers of unchecked military competition and the importance of diplomacy, remain as relevant as ever. As new challenges emerge in the realm of global security, the need for effective arms control, cooperation, and dialogue will continue to be essential in preventing the catastrophic consequences of nuclear war. The Cold War arms race may be over, but the work of securing a peaceful future free from nuclear threat remains an ongoing responsibility for all nations. In the aftermath of the Cold War, the arms race not only shaped the geopolitics of the past century but also influenced the trajectory of global security in the 21st century. The lasting impact of the Cold War's arms race is most evident in the persistent challenges surrounding nuclear weapons, their proliferation, and the strategic stability that these weapons continue to shape. Although the collapse of the Soviet Union brought an end to the intense ideological and military rivalry between the US and Russia, nuclear weapons remain central to global defense policies and strategies, with their legacy still being felt in today's world. One of the enduring consequences of the Cold War arms race is the modern concept of nuclear deterrence, which continues to guide the security policies of nuclear-armed nations. During the Cold War, both the United States and the Soviet Union relied on the idea of mutually assured destruction, MAD, to prevent a nuclear conflict. MAD posited that neither side would launch a nuclear attack because both possessed the ability to destroy the other completely. This doctrine created a fragile balance in which nuclear weapons were seen as a deterrent, not to be used, but rather to prevent war by ensuring the threat of total annihilation. Today, nuclear deterrence still plays a pivotal role in the military strategies of many countries, particularly the US and Russia, but the risks of this approach are more pronounced in an era of greater uncertainty. With the end of the Cold War, the arms race was not entirely left behind. While the number of nuclear weapons globally has been reduced, the emergence of new nuclear powers, such as India, Pakistan, and North Korea, has changed the dynamics of nuclear deterrence. The spread of nuclear weapons has raised fears of potential regional conflicts escalating into nuclear war. The ongoing challenges surrounding nuclear non-proliferation efforts are now compounded by the increasing unpredictability of countries with nuclear ambitions. North Korea, in particular, has become a focal point of global concern, as its continued nuclear tests and missile launches have highlighted the difficulty of maintaining a stable nuclear order in the modern era. The international community remains divided on how to address these challenges, with some advocating for more aggressive diplomacy, while others call for stronger military measures to counteract the nuclear threat. Another issue that has emerged in the post-Cold War period is the challenge of nuclear weapons modernization. While the arms race of the Cold War focused on stockpiling nuclear warheads and delivery systems, today's nuclear powers are investing heavily in the modernization of their nuclear arsenals. The US has embarked on a plan to refurbish its nuclear triad, consisting of land-based ICBMs, nuclear-capable bombers, and submarine-launched missiles. Russia, similarly, has been upgrading its nuclear forces, including the development of new hypersonic missiles and advanced missile defense systems. This modernization, while not equivalent to the massive buildup of the Cold War, nonetheless represents a new phase of competition that raises concerns about a renewed arms race. The increased technological sophistication of modern nuclear weapons, particularly the potential use of hypersonic and cyber-enabled technologies, has introduced new uncertainties into the nuclear equation, further complicating the task of arms control. Furthermore, the legacy of the Cold War arms race extends into the realm of international arms control agreements. Although many Cold War-era treaties, such as the INF Treaty, have been foundational in reducing the risks of nuclear conflict, several of these agreements are now facing serious challenges. The U.S. withdrawal from the INF Treaty in 2019, citing Russian violations of the agreement, marks a concerning trend of abandoning arms control frameworks. Similarly, the future of the New START Treaty, which limits the number of deployed strategic nuclear warheads and delivery systems, remains uncertain. With rising geopolitical tensions and the potential for new nuclear arms races, arms control agreements face an increasingly difficult path forward. The collapse of such agreements could trigger a new era of unchecked nuclear proliferation, reminiscent of the Cold War arms race, but in a more fragmented and unpredictable global context. The legacy of the Cold War arms race has also had a profound impact on global attitudes toward nuclear weapons. For decades, the fear of nuclear war was a defining feature of political discourse, with both governments and civilians living under the constant shadow of potential annihilation. This pervasive anxiety led to widespread civil defense programs in many countries, where governments prepared their populations for the possibility of nuclear conflict. In the U.S., for example, families were encouraged to build bomb shelters, and students practiced duck and cover drills in schools. While the Cold War has ended, the psychological impact of living in the shadow of nuclear weapons continues to shape global security policies. Today, many voices continue to call for the abolition of nuclear weapons altogether, advocating for a future where the destructive power of these weapons is no longer a tool of national security. In the 21st century, the lessons of the Cold War arms race remain as relevant as ever. As the world faces new challenges, including the rise of new nuclear powers and the continuing threat of nuclear terrorism, the importance of diplomacy, arms control, and nuclear disarmament cannot be overstated. The Cold War arms race was a sobering reminder of the destructive potential of nuclear weapons, and the continuing struggle for global security in the post-Cold War era underscores the need for continued vigilance and cooperation among nations. Although the Cold War itself may be over, its impact on global security and nuclear policy endures, reminding us that the work of ensuring a peaceful world without nuclear weapons is far from complete. The legacy of the Cold War arms race also extends into the realm of global diplomacy, where nuclear weapons have continued to play a central role in international relations. The nuclear arms race between the United States and the Soviet Union set the stage for a new era of diplomacy, one in which the existence of nuclear weapons has had a profound influence on the strategies and decision-making of all nations. The concept of deterrence, where the threat of overwhelming retaliation serves as a means of preventing war, has become a defining feature of international relations. This concept, which evolved during the Cold War, has been applied to a wide range of diplomatic issues, including regional conflicts, arms control negotiations, and international security arrangements. One of the most significant aspects of this nuclear diplomacy has been the establishment of arms control agreements between nuclear-armed nations. While the Cold War arms race was driven by the belief that possessing superior military technology would ensure national security, the experience of living under the constant threat of nuclear war led to the realization that some form of regulation was necessary. The SALT agreements, for instance, were some of the first steps toward controlling the nuclear arms race. The SALT I and SALT II treaties, negotiated in the 1970s, were pivotal in limiting the number of nuclear weapons both the US and the Soviet Union could deploy, helping to stabilize relations during a period of heightened tensions. These agreements paved the way for later disarmament treaties, including the INF Treaty and the New START Treaty. However, while arms control agreements have played a crucial role in preventing an outright nuclear war, they have not been without challenges. The withdrawal of the United States from the INF Treaty in 2019, due to Russian violations, highlighted the fragility of these agreements in a rapidly changing geopolitical environment. This, coupled with the growing nuclear capabilities of other countries such as China, India, and North Korea, has complicated the international arms control framework. As the global landscape continues to evolve, so too do the threats that nuclear weapons pose, and new strategies for managing these risks are increasingly necessary. Beyond formal agreements, the Cold War arms race also laid the groundwork for a global nuclear non-proliferation regime. The Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons, NPT, which was signed in 1968, became the cornerstone of global efforts to prevent the spread of nuclear weapons. The NPT established a framework in which nuclear-armed states committed to eventual disarmament while helping non-nuclear states develop nuclear technology for peaceful purposes. Despite its successes, the treaty has faced significant challenges, particularly as new nuclear powers have emerged. Nations such as India, Pakistan, and North Korea, which never signed the NPT, have developed nuclear weapons, and these developments have posed new obstacles to the global non-proliferation effort. The rise of these new nuclear powers, along with the ongoing nuclear ambitions of countries like Iran, has made the task of maintaining a stable nuclear order even more difficult. In the contemporary world, the Cold War arms race has left a legacy of mistrust and competition between nuclear-armed states, and while the risk of full-scale nuclear war has diminished, the threat of nuclear conflict remains. The rise of nuclear weapons in countries outside the US, Russia, and China has further complicated the arms control landscape, creating a world in which regional tensions and nuclear diplomacy are more important than ever. As the global security environment continues to evolve, the lessons of the Cold War arms race remain relevant. That nuclear weapons, while powerful tools of deterrence, also carry the potential for catastrophic destruction, and their management must remain a priority for all nations. Moreover, the issue of nuclear weapons in the modern era extends beyond state actors. The possibility of nuclear terrorism, where non-state actors could acquire or develop nuclear weapons, has become a growing concern in the 21st century. The Cold War arms race, with its focus on securing nuclear arsenals, left behind a world in which nuclear materials are dispersed across the globe. This has prompted international efforts to secure nuclear materials and prevent their use by terrorist organizations. In this regard, the legacy of the Cold War arms race is not only about state-to-state relations but also about the ongoing efforts to prevent nuclear weapons from falling into the hands of those who would use them for nefarious purposes. The legacy of the Cold War arms race serves as a powerful reminder of both the potential dangers and the diplomatic opportunities that nuclear weapons present. While the threat of nuclear war between the United States and the Soviet Union may have receded with the end of the Cold War, the challenges posed by nuclear weapons have not disappeared. The development of new nuclear technologies, the emergence of new nuclear states, and the ongoing concerns about nuclear terrorism all contribute to the complexity of managing global nuclear security in the modern era. The work that began during the Cold War to control, limit, and eventually reduce nuclear weapons must continue in the 21st century, as the risks of nuclear conflict, though diminished, still pose a significant threat to global peace and stability. Looking forward from the Cold War, the arms race has cast a long shadow over the world's political and military landscape, influencing how countries view the role of nuclear weapons in modern warfare. While the Cold War itself is over, its legacy has shaped the way many nations approach military spending, international diplomacy, and security. The strategic doctrines that arose from the arms race still affect the defense policies of nuclear powers today. Although the US and Russia have significantly reduced their nuclear arsenals, the number of nuclear weapons globally remains substantial. In fact, the post-Cold War era has seen new challenges to nuclear disarmament, including modern arms development, regional nuclear conflicts, and the presence of nuclear weapons in states not party to international non-proliferation agreements. One of the biggest challenges in the post-Cold War period has been the persistence of nuclear weapons in international security and military doctrines. Despite the arms reduction treaties such as the New START, which aims to limit the number of deployed nuclear warheads, the existence of nuclear weapons still remains an integral part of the national security strategies of many countries. This is particularly evident in nations like the United States, Russia, China, and India, which continue to modernize their nuclear arsenals. These powers have moved from large stockpiles of nuclear weapons to more technologically advanced, smaller arsenals designed to achieve the same strategic deterrence with greater precision. The introduction of new technologies, including hypersonic missiles and missile defense systems, has further complicated the arms control landscape, raising concerns about new forms of escalation that did not exist during the Cold War. One of the key developments that arose in the post-Cold War period is the issue of nuclear proliferation. As new countries have emerged as nuclear powers or developed nuclear ambitions, the global security landscape has become more complex. While the NPT has been successful in limiting the spread of nuclear weapons to some extent, nations such as India, Pakistan, and North Korea have successfully developed nuclear arsenals outside the framework of the treaty. North Korea's nuclear tests have led to ongoing diplomatic challenges, as the country has repeatedly defied global efforts to curb its weapons program. The growing concern over nuclear proliferation highlights the difficulty of maintaining a stable and secure nuclear order in an increasingly multipolar world. In response to these challenges, the global community has attempted to enhance the focus on nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation. The International Atomic Energy Agency, IAEA, plays a key role in monitoring nuclear programs to ensure that nuclear technology is used for peaceful purposes, but as countries like Iran have shown, the line between peaceful nuclear energy programs and nuclear weapons development can be difficult to define. The negotiation of the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, JCPOA, with Iran in 2015, while controversial, represents a modern attempt at controlling nuclear proliferation and preventing a regional arms race in the Middle East. However, the withdrawal of the United States from the deal in 2018 has exacerbated tensions in the region and underscored the difficulties in managing non-proliferation agreements. The challenge of preventing the spread of nuclear weapons remains one of the most pressing issues in global security today. Additionally, the shadow of nuclear weapons continues to loom over regional conflicts, where the presence of even a limited nuclear arsenal can dramatically alter the dynamics of diplomacy and military strategy. The ongoing tension between India and Pakistan is a prime example of this. Both nations possess nuclear weapons, and their rivalry, rooted in territorial disputes and historical animosities, has raised the possibility of a regional nuclear conflict. While nuclear deterrence has so far prevented direct confrontation between the two countries, the existence of nuclear weapons in such a volatile region underscores the complex role that nuclear weapons play in modern geopolitics. This regional nuclear competition has wider implications for global security, as it could trigger an arms race among other nations in the region, destabilizing the balance of power. In recent years, global efforts to address nuclear disarmament have become increasingly difficult. The Cold War arms race created a world where nuclear weapons were seen as a symbol of strength and political power. However, the post-Cold War world has become more multipolar, with rising powers like China and emerging regional nuclear players challenging the existing power structures. While countries like the United States and Russia have significantly reduced their arsenals, they are still modernizing their weapons, and the idea of a world free from nuclear weapons seems increasingly remote. The Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, which entered into force in 2021, reflects the growing global movement toward complete disarmament, but it faces significant challenges. Many of the world's nuclear-armed states have not signed the treaty, arguing that disarmament needs to be approached carefully and in stages, to ensure global security is not compromised. The path forward for arms control and nuclear disarmament is uncertain. The Cold War's arms race was driven by the perceived need for security in a bipolar world where two superpowers were locked in a deadly standoff. Today, the nuclear threat remains, but the world is more fragmented, with multiple players vying for influence, and the risks of regional conflicts escalating into nuclear war are as present as ever. In this complex global environment, the lessons of the Cold War, the importance of diplomacy, the dangers of unchecked military competition, and the need for arms control, continue to resonate. As long as nuclear weapons remain part of global military arsenals, the work of managing and reducing these weapons remains an urgent task for nations, with the potential for nuclear conflict still looming over the international community. As the world continues to navigate the complexities of nuclear arms control and disarmament, one of the most pressing challenges is ensuring that the catastrophic potential of these weapons never becomes a reality. The Cold War arms race left a global security framework heavily reliant on the deterrence provided by nuclear arsenals. However, as we move further into the 21st century, the need for international cooperation to prevent nuclear conflict and address the evolving threats of nuclear proliferation has never been more critical. The dangers of a new arms race, particularly in the context of emerging nuclear states and technological advancements, are real and present. Today, the world faces a unique set of circumstances that make global nuclear security a pressing issue, despite the lessons learned from the Cold War era. One of the main driving forces behind this renewed urgency is the role that emerging technologies are playing in reshaping the nuclear landscape. The development of hypersonic missiles, cyber warfare capabilities, and missile defense systems presents both new opportunities and new risks. Hypersonic missiles, which can travel at speeds greater than Mach 5, complicate traditional missile defense systems and present a challenge to arms-controlled treaties that were designed with older technologies in mind. These advancements threaten to undermine the stability that the Cold War-era deterrence strategy was built upon. As countries develop these new technologies, the risk of miscalculation or misunderstanding in an already volatile geopolitical environment grows. Cyber threats are another emerging risk that has the potential to disrupt nuclear security. The prospect of cyberattacks on nuclear command and control systems or missile defense networks adds an additional layer of complexity to international security. In the past, nuclear arsenals were protected by physical security measures and human decision-making, but in the digital age, the potential for cyber interference creates new vulnerabilities. As states modernize their nuclear arsenals, ensuring that these weapon systems are secure from cyberattacks becomes a crucial aspect of maintaining strategic stability. A successful cyberattack on a nuclear weapons launch system or a nuclear command network could have catastrophic consequences, potentially triggering an accidental or unauthorized launch. As global tensions continue to rise in regions such as the Korean Peninsula, South Asia, and the Middle East, the importance of multilateral diplomacy becomes ever more apparent. The Cold War arms race was primarily a bilateral confrontation between the United States and the Soviet Union, but today's nuclear issues involve a broader range of actors. The international community faces the dual challenge of preventing the spread of nuclear weapons while also addressing the existing nuclear capabilities of countries that are outside of arms-controlled treaties. North Korea's nuclear program has already forced a major shift in global diplomacy, with the U.S. and its allies engaged in complex negotiations aimed at denuclearization. Yet, these efforts have often faltered, illustrating the difficulty of addressing nuclear threats in an environment where new players are continually entering the nuclear arena. A critical element of contemporary nuclear diplomacy is the ongoing challenge of arms control and nonproliferation. While treaties like the New START agreement have helped limit the number of nuclear warheads between the U.S. and Russia, they have not fully addressed the nuclear ambitions of other states. Nonproliferation remains a key objective of international efforts to reduce the nuclear threat, but the barriers to achieving comprehensive disarmament are significant. The fact that countries like India, Pakistan, and Israel have developed nuclear weapons outside of the nonproliferation framework has made it more difficult to achieve universal compliance with the NPT. Furthermore, the increasing reluctance of nuclear powers to sign new disarmament agreements, due to regional security concerns or the rise of new nuclear threats, continues to hinder progress. One of the key aspects of the post-Cold War nuclear era is the importance of global institutions in managing nuclear security. The United Nations (UN), the International Atomic Energy Agency (IAEA), and other international bodies play essential roles in monitoring nuclear developments and ensuring that countries adhere to international standards. However, these institutions are often faced with significant political obstacles that prevent them from taking decisive action. The inability of the UN Security Council to address the growing nuclear threats from North Korea or Iran, for instance, highlights the challenges of achieving consensus on nuclear security. This political paralysis often results in slow responses to emerging nuclear threats, which can allow dangerous situations to escalate unchecked. Looking ahead, the global community must continue to engage in arms control and nonproliferation efforts with renewed focus and urgency. While the Cold War arms race demonstrated the destructive potential of nuclear weapons, It also showed that diplomatic engagement and arms-controlled treaties could play a role in reducing the risk of conflict. The post-Cold War era presents new challenges, but it also offers opportunities for cooperation and progress. The evolution of arms control, nuclear disarmament, and non-proliferation efforts must keep pace with new technologies and the shifting geopolitical landscape. The legacy of the Cold War arms race is still shaping global security today, and the world must be vigilant in managing the nuclear threat in an increasingly complex and interconnected world. The lessons learned from the Cold War must continue to guide international efforts to prevent nuclear conflict, as the risk of such a catastrophic event remains a critical concern for future generations. As we reflect on the legacy of the Cold War arms race, it becomes clear that its impact is far-reaching, extending beyond the geopolitical and military dynamics of the 20th century into the contemporary era. While the arms race itself may have subsided with the end of the Cold War and the dissolution of the Soviet Union, the underlying issues it created, namely, the continued existence of nuclear weapons and the threat they pose, remain at the heart of modern international security. The arms race itself was a defining feature of the Cold War, representing a competition between two superpowers locked in an ideological struggle for global dominance. However, as we move further into the 21st century, the competition has evolved. The focus has shifted from a binary conflict between the United States and the Soviet Union to a more complex global environment where nuclear weapons are viewed through the lens of regional security concerns, technological advancements, and global non-proliferation efforts. The nuclear threat, in many ways, remains a reality in the world today. Although the collapse of the Soviet Union ended the existential threat of a nuclear war between the US and Russia, the sheer number of nuclear weapons that exist around the globe, as well as the countries that possess them, suggests that the risks associated with nuclear arsenals have not disappeared. In fact, in some respects, they have become more complicated. With countries like North Korea, Iran, and others on the brink of nuclear weapons capabilities, the fear of nuclear proliferation has taken center stage in global security discussions. The arms race between the US and the Soviet Union may have ended, but the arms race now extends to include emerging nuclear states, posing new risks and challenges for international diplomacy. One of the most striking features of the Cold War arms race was the constant pursuit of technological superiority. Both superpowers devoted enormous resources to developing increasingly sophisticated nuclear weapons, delivery systems, and defense technologies. Today, this emphasis on technological innovation continues, but it has broadened to include new realms of warfare. While nuclear weapons remain central to military deterrence, countries are increasingly investing in other advanced technologies, such as cyber warfare, artificial intelligence, and space-based weapons. The combination of nuclear arms with these emerging technologies creates new risks and strategic challenges. Cyber attacks on nuclear command systems, the development of missile defense systems that can potentially neutralize nuclear deterrence, and the militarization of space are all concerns that make the task of arms control and disarmament even more complex than it was during the Cold War. In the modern world, multilateral diplomacy and arms control agreements are more crucial than ever. Despite the legacy of distrust and competition that the Cold War arms race fostered, the global community has increasingly focused on reducing the risks of nuclear conflict through international cooperation. The United Nations, the IAEA, and other international organizations play a central role in promoting arms control and non-proliferation, though these bodies face increasing challenges. One of the greatest obstacles to effective arms control in the post-Cold War world is the rise of new nuclear powers, which have not been part of the traditional arms control framework. While treaties like the New START agreement between the US and Russia have helped reduce the nuclear arsenals of the world's largest nuclear powers, the spread of nuclear weapons to states outside of the treaty framework poses a major challenge. Countries such as North Korea and Iran continue to develop their nuclear capabilities, while other nations may be tempted to follow suit, raising the specter of a new global arms race. The nuclear non-proliferation regime, centered around the NPT, has been instrumental in curbing the spread of nuclear weapons, but it faces significant hurdles in today's geopolitical environment. The NPT aims to prevent countries that do not possess nuclear weapons from acquiring them, while promoting peaceful nuclear energy programs. However, as some countries break away from the treaty or challenge its terms, the foundation of global nuclear security becomes more unstable. North Korea's withdrawal from the NPT and its subsequent nuclear weapons development exemplify the challenges the international community faces in addressing proliferation. Similarly, Iran's nuclear program has been a point of contention for years, with diplomatic efforts like the JCPOA aimed at curbing its nuclear ambitions, but these efforts have faced setbacks due to political divisions and violations of the agreement. The broader challenge in the post-Cold War world is not just about preventing the spread of nuclear weapons but also about reducing the total number of existing weapons. While the Cold War-era arms race saw the accumulation of thousands of nuclear warheads, the modern arms race is characterized by the modernization of existing arsenals and the development of new, more advanced nuclear technologies. The goal of complete disarmament, championed by many nuclear non-proliferation advocates, seems increasingly difficult to achieve. Still, arms control agreements like the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty, CTBT, and various disarmament proposals continue to push for reductions in the global nuclear stockpile. These efforts face significant opposition from countries that see nuclear weapons as essential to their national security, which highlights the complex balance that must be struck between global security and the sovereign interests of individual nations. The Cold War arms race, while a historical phenomenon, has left an indelible mark on the international security landscape. The competition between the US and the Soviet Union during the Cold War has evolved into a complex global challenge, where nuclear weapons are still a central issue in international diplomacy. The proliferation of nuclear weapons to new states, the continued modernization of existing arsenals, and the rise of new technologies all make the task of arms control and disarmament more difficult than ever. Despite these challenges, the lessons of the Cold War, the importance of diplomacy, arms reduction, and global cooperation, remain as relevant today as they were during the height of the arms race. The legacy of the Cold War arms race serves as a reminder of the catastrophic potential of nuclear weapons and the need for ongoing efforts to manage and reduce these weapons in a complex, multipolar world. As we move further into the 21st century, the enduring legacy of the Cold War arms race continues to shape our understanding of nuclear security and international diplomacy. The arms race that defined much of the Cold War was not merely a military competition between two superpowers. It was also a profound reflection of the broader ideological struggle between communism and capitalism. The pursuit of nuclear superiority, accompanied by rapid technological advancements, set the stage for many of the security challenges and diplomatic negotiations we face today. Though the Cold War may be over, the world remains deeply entangled in its consequences, with nuclear weapons still at the heart of global security concerns. In today's world, the strategic importance of nuclear weapons has not diminished. Nuclear deterrence continues to play a central role in the defense policies of major nuclear powers, including the United States, Russia, and China. Despite reductions in the size of nuclear arsenals through various arms control agreements, these weapons still serve as the ultimate tool of national security for these countries. The US and Russia, despite drastically reducing their nuclear stockpiles, remain the world's two largest nuclear powers, and their arsenals continue to heavily influence global strategic dynamics. The era of the Cold War arms race may have ended, but the relationship between nuclear weapons and international power remains deeply entrenched. The issue of nuclear proliferation, the spread of nuclear weapons to other countries, has become one of the defining security challenges of the post-Cold War world. While countries like the US, Russia, and China possess large nuclear arsenals, the prospect of new nuclear states has created new uncertainties in global security. North Korea's nuclear weapons program and the potential for Iran to acquire nuclear capabilities are sources of ongoing concern for international diplomacy. The spread of nuclear technology has fundamentally altered the landscape of nuclear deterrence, leading to the rise of regional nuclear powers that could, in theory, challenge the global order. Nuclear proliferation raises the risk of regional conflicts escalating into full-scale nuclear war and underscores the need for robust arms control measures to prevent the further spread of these weapons. The modern arms control regime has made significant strides in curbing the spread of nuclear weapons, but challenges persist. The Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons, NPT, which remains the cornerstone of global non-proliferation efforts, aims to prevent the further spread of nuclear weapons while encouraging nuclear disarmament. The treaty has achieved notable successes, but it also faces significant obstacles. For one, the nuclear-armed states under the NPT, the US, Russia, the UK, France, and China, have been slow to move toward disarmament. Meanwhile, countries like India, Pakistan, and Israel, which have not signed the NPT, possess nuclear weapons outside the treaty framework. The global nuclear non-proliferation regime is thus far from comprehensive, and the risk of further nuclear states emerging remains a pressing concern. Furthermore, the collapse of Cold War-era arms control agreements, such as the INF Treaty, has raised questions about the future of global nuclear diplomacy. The INF Treaty, which banned ground-launched intermediate-range nuclear missiles, was one of the key arms control agreements between the US and Russia. Its collapse in 2019 was a blow to global nuclear arms control efforts, and the subsequent buildup of intermediate-range missiles by both powers has created new strategic risks. These developments underscore the fragile nature of arms control agreements and the difficulty of maintaining international consensus on nuclear weapons regulation. As new technologies emerge, arms-controlled treaties that were designed for an earlier era may no longer be effective, and a new approach to nuclear security will be required. As the world faces these challenges, one of the most pressing issues is the growing danger of nuclear terrorism. The threat of nuclear weapons falling into the hands of non-state actors, such as terrorist organizations, is a terrifying prospect that has become a focal point of global security efforts. The collapse of state control over nuclear materials, as seen in the case of the Soviet Union's disintegration, makes the potential for nuclear terrorism a real concern. Securing nuclear materials, ensuring robust safeguards, and preventing illicit trafficking of nuclear technology are critical components of modern non-proliferation efforts. The nuclear black market remains a threat, and organizations like the International Atomic Energy Agency, IAEA, play an essential role in monitoring the security of nuclear materials worldwide. Another emerging challenge in the realm of nuclear security is the continued advancement of military technologies that intersect with nuclear weapons. The development of missile defense systems, hypersonic weapons, and cyber capabilities adds new layers of complexity to the global arms control framework. Missile defense systems, while designed to protect countries from missile attacks, also raise concerns about their potential to neutralize nuclear deterrence by rendering certain nuclear weapons obsolete. This creates a destabilizing dynamic, as countries may feel compelled to develop even more advanced nuclear weapons to counter missile defense systems. Similarly, the rise of cyber warfare, which could potentially target nuclear command and control systems, adds a new dimension to nuclear risk management. In an increasingly digital world, the potential for cyberattacks on nuclear systems has raised the stakes of maintaining secure and reliable deterrence. In response to these challenges, global arms control initiatives will need to evolve. The legacy of the Cold War arms race has taught the world that nuclear weapons are both a tool of power and a dangerous liability. The lessons of the past, particularly the catastrophic potential of a nuclear conflict, must continue to guide international efforts toward arms reduction, non-proliferation, and ultimately disarmament. While the Cold War arms race is behind us, the lessons learned from this dangerous period are still relevant in today's world. As new threats emerge and technologies evolve, the international community must remain vigilant in managing the risks posed by nuclear weapons. The work of securing a peaceful world, free from the specter of nuclear conflict, continues to be one of the greatest challenges of the modern era. As we look back on the Cold War arms race and its continuing impact, it's important to recognize that while the dynamics of nuclear competition may have shifted, the fundamental concerns about nuclear security, power balance, and international cooperation remain as relevant today as they were during the height of the Cold War. The Cold War arms race was a defining feature of the 20th century, characterized by intense rivalry, the threat of annihilation, and the creation of vast arsenals of nuclear weapons. This period may have ended, but the global landscape shaped by these weapons continues to influence the strategies and actions of modern nations. Today, the world finds itself in an era where the lessons of the Cold War arms race are both a guide and a warning as nations navigate the complexities of nuclear diplomacy, non-proliferation, and arms control. One of the most significant aspects of the Cold War arms race was the ideological divide it created. The United States and the Soviet Union, driven by their conflicting political and economic systems, were locked in an ideological struggle that extended to the military and technological realms. The arms race was not just a competition over the number of nuclear weapons, but a battle for ideological supremacy. While the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, the legacy of this ideological struggle is still present in today's geopolitical landscape. The US and Russia remain the two largest nuclear powers, and their relationship continues to define much of the global nuclear order. However, the proliferation of nuclear weapons to other countries, such as India, Pakistan, North Korea, and Iran, has altered the balance of power, making nuclear diplomacy more complicated and more urgent than ever. The end of the Cold War arms race did lead to significant reductions in the global stockpile of nuclear weapons, particularly through agreements such as the START treaties. These agreements marked a shift toward arms control, focusing on reducing the number of nuclear warheads and delivery systems. However, while the Cold War arms race may have slowed, the fundamental security concerns that drove it, namely, the desire for strategic advantage, deterrence, and influence, have not gone away. In fact, as new powers have emerged with nuclear capabilities, the arms race has simply evolved. Nations such as China, India, and North Korea have developed nuclear weapons, challenging the old Cold War order and complicating efforts to prevent further proliferation. The enduring legacy of the Cold War arms race has also highlighted the importance of international non-proliferation efforts. The NPT, which was established in 1970, remains a cornerstone of efforts to prevent the spread of nuclear weapons. The treaty has been successful in limiting the number of nuclear-armed states and promoting the peaceful use of nuclear energy. However, as new nuclear states have emerged and as countries like North Korea and Iran have pursued nuclear programs outside of the treaty framework, the challenge of nuclear non-proliferation has become more complex. The global community continues to struggle with balancing the need for disarmament, non-proliferation, and the legitimate security concerns of nuclear states. The threat of nuclear war has not disappeared, even if it no longer dominates the global landscape in the same way it did during the Cold War. The presence of nuclear weapons in regions like South Asia, where India and Pakistan are locked in an ongoing territorial dispute, and the Korean Peninsula, where North Korea's nuclear ambitions remain a source of tension, continues to pose risks of nuclear conflict. These regional flashpoints, where nuclear weapons play a critical role in national security, remind us that nuclear deterrence and the fear of escalation are still key factors in modern geopolitics. As long as nuclear weapons remain a tool of power, the potential for conflict involving them remains a real concern. While the Cold War may have ended, the arms race left behind a legacy of military technologies, infrastructure, and strategies that still influence today's nuclear policies. The Cold War arms race spurred innovation in nuclear weapons and delivery systems, and those technologies remain integral to global military capabilities. Modern advancements, such as missile defense systems, hypersonic missiles, and cyber warfare capabilities, have added new layers of complexity to the issue of nuclear deterrence. These technological advancements have not only changed the way countries think about nuclear security, but they have also introduced new risks, such as the potential for cyber attacks on nuclear command and control systems. As technology continues to evolve, so too does the nature of nuclear deterrence and the strategies countries employ to ensure their security. The enduring challenge, then, is to find a way to manage the risks posed by nuclear weapons in the 21st century. The lessons of the Cold War arms race, the importance of diplomacy, arms control, and reducing the number of nuclear weapons, are just as relevant today as they were in the past. The post-Cold War world presents new challenges, such as the emergence of new nuclear powers, the risks of nuclear terrorism, and the complexity of modern technological advancements, all of which require a thoughtful, cooperative approach to nuclear security. Arms control agreements, such as the new START treaty, are important steps forward, but they are not enough on their own. A comprehensive approach to nuclear security requires global cooperation, multilateral diplomacy, and a renewed commitment to disarmament. In conclusion, while the Cold War arms race may have come to an end, its legacy continues to shape the global security landscape. The proliferation of nuclear weapons, the risk of nuclear conflict, and the ongoing challenges of arms control and nonproliferation are all enduring aspects of international relations in the post-Cold War era. The Cold War arms race demonstrated the catastrophic potential of nuclear weapons, but it also highlighted the importance of diplomacy, negotiation, and international cooperation in managing this dangerous power. As the world faces new nuclear challenges, the lessons of the Cold War arms race must continue to inform efforts to reduce the nuclear threat and work toward a more secure and peaceful world. The Cold War arms race fundamentally reshaped global politics, military strategy, and international relations, and its influence is still felt today. The competition between the United States and the Soviet Union, which pushed both superpowers to develop increasingly sophisticated and destructive nuclear weapons, had far-reaching consequences that extend far beyond the Cold War era. Today, the world faces a complex nuclear landscape, shaped by the legacies of the arms race, where the risk of nuclear conflict is no longer just a fear between two powers but a global concern involving multiple nations and emerging technologies. One of the most important lessons from the Cold War arms race is the crucial role that diplomacy and international cooperation play in managing nuclear weapons. While the Cold War superpowers built their arsenals in a climate of mistrust and ideological division, the eventual arms control agreements they signed, such as the Strategic Arms Limitation Talks, SALT, and the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces, INF, Treaty, marked significant steps toward reducing the nuclear threat. These treaties, which helped to curb the number of nuclear weapons held by both nations, proved that even the most intense adversaries could negotiate and find common ground when the stakes were high. The idea of mutually assured destruction, MAD, that defined much of the Cold War nuclear standoff also showed how important it was for both sides to maintain enough restraint to prevent catastrophic escalation. These early arms control measures laid the groundwork for today's ongoing efforts at nuclear disarmament and nonproliferation. However, despite these achievements, the post-Cold War era has seen new nuclear risks emerge. As nuclear technology has spread beyond the US and Russia, new challenges have arisen, with countries like North Korea, Iran, and India pursuing or maintaining nuclear weapons programs outside the established arms control frameworks. The rise of these new nuclear states has introduced a level of unpredictability into global security, as regional powers with nuclear capabilities act in ways that could undermine global stability. For example, North Korea's continued nuclear tests and missile launches have raised tensions not just in the Korean peninsula, but also globally, as the international community grapples with how to deal with a nuclear-armed rogue state. Similarly, Iran's nuclear ambitions have spurred diplomatic efforts, such as the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, JCPOA, aimed at curbing its nuclear program, though this agreement has faced significant challenges and setbacks. The challenge of nuclear proliferation has added a new layer of complexity to the global arms control agenda. While arms control agreements between the United States and Russia have made significant strides in reducing the number of deployed nuclear warheads, the broader goal of nuclear disarmament remains elusive. The current nuclear order, shaped by the remnants of the Cold War arms race, consists of a complex web of treaties, national security concerns, and competing interests, making it difficult to reach a consensus on the path forward. The risk of further nuclear proliferation is a constant concern, as countries that do not currently possess nuclear weapons may seek to develop them as a means of ensuring their security or advancing their regional influence. In response, efforts to strengthen the global non-proliferation regime, such as the NPT, must be coupled with new strategies for managing the security concerns of non-nuclear states while addressing the desires of nuclear powers to maintain their arsenals. Another legacy of the Cold War arms race is the strategic use of nuclear weapons as a means of deterrence. While the existential threat of global nuclear war has diminished, nuclear weapons are still seen as essential tools of national defense for many countries. The nuclear triad, consisting of land-based intercontinental ballistic missiles, ICBMs, submarine-launched ballistic missiles, SLBMs, and strategic bombers, remains the cornerstone of nuclear deterrence for the US and Russia, and similar systems are in place for other nuclear-armed states. This reliance on nuclear deterrence, though seen as a stabilizing force in some respects, also comes with risks. The potential for accidental launches, misunderstandings, or miscalculations in high-stress situations remains a dangerous possibility. Moreover, the continued modernization of nuclear arsenals, which includes new nuclear technologies and delivery systems, means that nuclear weapons are unlikely to disappear from the global stage anytime soon. At the same time, the issue of nuclear terrorism is an ever-growing concern. The potential for nuclear materials to fall into the hands of non-state actors, such as terrorist groups, remains one of the most dangerous scenarios in contemporary global security. The possibility of a terrorist organization acquiring a nuclear weapon or radioactive material could be catastrophic, and securing nuclear materials, particularly in the aftermath of the Cold War, is critical for preventing this type of threat. International organizations like the IAEA and the United Nations have been working to secure and safeguard nuclear materials worldwide, but the global black market for these materials and the growing number of nuclear-capable countries have made this a more complex challenge. The advent of cyber warfare also introduces new vulnerabilities, as cyberattacks could potentially compromise the security of nuclear systems, leading to new risks and uncertainties. Looking ahead, it is clear that the Cold War arms race left a legacy that continues to influence global security today. The danger of nuclear conflict, while perhaps less immediate than during the Cold War, is still a significant concern. The risk of nuclear proliferation, the challenges of non-proliferation, and the potential for new technologies to destabilize nuclear deterrence all point to the continuing need for arms control, diplomacy, and global cooperation. While the lessons of the Cold War era provide a framework for managing nuclear weapons, the modern nuclear landscape requires new strategies and innovative solutions to ensure the security and stability of the world. The goal of achieving a nuclear-free world remains a distant one, but the pursuit of arms reduction and non-proliferation continues to be a vital part of global diplomacy in the 21st century. As we conclude this exploration of the Cold War arms race and its lasting effects on global security, it's essential to understand that the lessons learned during this period of intense rivalry continue to shape contemporary international relations. The Cold War was a time when nuclear weapons were both a symbol of national power and a source of immense danger, and the arms race that accompanied it demonstrated just how precarious the balance of global security can be when countries engage in a competition for ever more powerful weapons. The nuclear arms race was not merely about the accumulation of bombs. It was a reflection of the political ideologies that drove the two superpowers to develop ever more sophisticated technology as a means of asserting dominance on the world stage. Today, while the Cold War has ended, the global nuclear landscape remains complex and fraught with risks. The number of nuclear states has grown, and regional conflicts continue to add new dimensions to the issue of nuclear proliferation. The emergence of countries like North Korea, which has developed nuclear weapons despite international opposition, and the ongoing concerns surrounding Iran's nuclear program have shown that the Cold War-era focus on the US and Soviet Union has expanded to include new players with their own motivations and regional ambitions. These developments underscore the need for a broader, more inclusive approach to nuclear diplomacy and arms control, one that reflects the realities of a multipolar world in which more nations possess nuclear capabilities. The arms control efforts of the post-Cold War era, including treaties such as the New START and the INF Treaty, have achieved some success in reducing the nuclear threat between the US and Russia, but they are not enough on their own to address the global proliferation of nuclear weapons. The challenge remains how to address the nuclear ambitions of states outside the established nuclear powers while simultaneously managing the existing arsenals of the countries that already possess these weapons. The complexities of this issue are compounded by technological advancements, such as hypersonic missiles and cyber warfare capabilities, which threaten to alter the calculations of deterrence that were central to Cold War-era arms control agreements. In this evolving global environment, nuclear weapons continue to serve as instruments of both deterrence and fear. While nuclear war between major powers may seem less likely than it was during the Cold War, the risk of regional nuclear conflicts or accidental launches remains a constant concern. The fear of miscalculations, technological failures, or conflicts escalating to the use of nuclear weapons highlights the ongoing importance of diplomatic efforts, arms control agreements, and global non-proliferation initiatives. The reality is that, despite reductions in the number of nuclear warheads, nuclear weapons remain a central part of military strategy for many countries, and their potential use cannot be ruled out entirely. In the face of these challenges, the international community must continue to emphasize the importance of nuclear disarmament, even as it works to address the proliferation risks posed by countries seeking nuclear capabilities. The global non-proliferation regime, anchored by the NPT and supported by institutions such as the IAEA, remains a crucial framework for preventing the spread of nuclear weapons. However, this framework must adapt to the changing geopolitical realities and the emergence of new technologies that could further complicate arms control efforts. The lessons of the Cold War arms race offer valuable insights into how nations can navigate the delicate balance between national security and global peace. The competition between the US and the Soviet Union, while a period of dangerous rivalry, also led to significant arms control agreements that have helped prevent a full-scale nuclear conflict. These agreements, however, must be continually updated and expanded to reflect the realities of today's nuclear world. The risk of nuclear escalation, whether through regional conflicts or technological advancements, remains an ever-present concern, and the work of reducing this threat requires ongoing cooperation, transparency, and diplomacy on a global scale. In conclusion, the Cold War arms race, while a defining period in history, also serves as a reminder of the risks posed by the possession of nuclear weapons. As we move forward, it is crucial to continue learning from the past and working to ensure that the mistakes of the Cold War are not repeated in the modern era. The goal of a nuclear-free world may seem distant, but through collective action, continued arms reduction, and a renewed commitment to non-proliferation, it remains a goal worth pursuing. The Cold War may be over, but the work to manage the legacy of the arms race and reduce the nuclear threat remains one of the most important challenges of our time. The Cold War, a period of intense rivalry and tension between the United States and the Soviet Union, began shortly after the end of World War II. It wasn't a direct military conflict, but rather a prolonged geopolitical struggle marked by proxy wars, ideological battles, and a frantic race for technological and military superiority. This complex period lasted for several decades, spanning from the end of the 1940s until the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991. It was defined not by full-scale battles but by espionage, economic warfare, and the ever-present threat of nuclear conflict. The Cold War emerged from the differing political and economic systems of the two superpowers. On one side was the capitalist, democratic United States, and on the other, the communist Soviet Union, which sought to spread its ideology across the globe. The ideological divide created an atmosphere of mutual distrust, setting the stage for the tense interactions that would dominate global politics for nearly half a century. In the aftermath of World War II, Europe was in ruins, and both the US and the USSR sought to exert influence over the rebuilding of the continent. The US, with its powerful economy, aimed to spread democratic ideals and capitalist economies in Western Europe. Meanwhile, the Soviet Union sought to expand its influence over Eastern Europe, promoting communist governments that aligned with Moscow's interests. This division of Europe marked the physical manifestation of the ideological divide, with the continent split into two hostile spheres. The Berlin Wall, constructed in 1961, became the symbol of this division, physically separating East and West Berlin, and serving as a reminder of the broader global divide between the communist East and the capitalist West. This period of tension also gave rise to numerous proxy wars, where both sides supported opposing factions in various regional conflicts. From the Korean War to the Vietnam War, the US and the Soviet Union backed different sides in local struggles, each seeking to spread their influence and prevent the other from gaining ground. These conflicts were often violent and devastating, but they never escalated into full-blown direct warfare between the two superpowers. Instead, both sides relied heavily on their military allies and proxy forces, ensuring that the Cold War remained cold, despite the high body count and the conflicts that arose. Throughout these years, the threat of nuclear war hung over the world, with the arms race becoming a key aspect of the Cold War struggle. As tensions escalated, both the US and the Soviet Union began to rapidly develop and stockpile nuclear weapons, each hoping to deter the other from launching an attack by creating a balance of terror. This period is often characterized by the concept of mutually assured destruction, MAD, which meant that both sides had the ability to destroy each other with their nuclear arsenals, ensuring that neither would dare strike first. The development of intercontinental ballistic missiles, ICBMs, and nuclear submarines further increased the stakes of the arms race. The fear of nuclear war was ever present, with both countries maintaining a constant state of readiness, while their military-industrial complexes pushed for the development of ever more powerful weapons. The arms race was not just a technological battle but a psychological one as well, with each side attempting to prove its superiority to the other while avoiding direct confrontation. This constant buildup of arms and the threat of nuclear war would remain central to the Cold War, shaping global politics and the daily lives of people on both sides of the divide. The emergence of military blocs during the Cold War was a crucial development in the ongoing arms race. The establishment of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO, in 1949 marked the formal military alignment of Western powers against the Soviet Union. NATO was created to provide collective defense and was intended to deter any potential Soviet aggression in Europe. The alliance included the United States, Canada, and several Western European nations, which collectively vowed to defend each other in the event of an attack. This military pact strengthened the US's influence in Europe and served as a clear counterbalance to the Soviet threat. NATO's formation, however, only heightened tensions between the two superpowers, as it was perceived by the USSR as a direct threat to its influence over Eastern Europe and its security. In response to NATO, the Soviet Union formed its own military alliance in 1955, the Warsaw Pact. This organization united the Soviet Union with its satellite states in Eastern Europe, creating a formidable counterweight to the NATO alliance. The Warsaw Pact was initially founded under the pretext of mutual defense, but its true purpose was to ensure Soviet control over Eastern Europe and to consolidate the Soviet sphere of influence in the region. The formation of NATO and the Warsaw Pact effectively divided Europe into two military camps, with each side bolstering its defenses and preparing for potential conflict. This polarization of Europe served as a constant reminder of the Cold War's ideological and military divide. The arms race between the United States and the Soviet Union was not limited to conventional weapons. The most significant aspect of this competition was the development and stockpiling of nuclear weapons. Both nations sought to gain a strategic advantage by building increasingly powerful nuclear arsenals, a competition that would shape much of the Cold War period. The United States had the upper hand in the early years, having been the first country to develop nuclear weapons during World War II. The first atomic bomb was dropped on Hiroshima in 1945, giving the US a significant advantage in the immediate aftermath of the war. However, the Soviet Union quickly caught up. In 1949, the USSR successfully tested its first atomic bomb, signaling the beginning of the nuclear arms race. This event marked the end of the US's nuclear monopoly and created a sense of urgency within American defense circles. As both superpowers worked feverishly to expand their nuclear arsenals, the world watched in fear as the prospect of a devastating nuclear war seemed increasingly likely. The arms race accelerated in the 1950s and 1960s, with both nations developing new types of nuclear weapons, including hydrogen bombs, which were far more powerful than the original atomic bombs. By the mid-1960s, both the United States and the Soviet Union had enough nuclear weapons to destroy each other multiple times over. This led to the doctrine of mutually assured destruction, MAD, which became the cornerstone of Cold War nuclear strategy. The basic idea behind MAD was that if both sides had the capacity to annihilate the other, neither would risk launching a first strike. The sheer destructive power of nuclear weapons made direct conflict between the US and the Soviet Union too catastrophic to contemplate. Thus, both nations focused on building even more advanced weaponry and delivery systems, such as intercontinental ballistic missiles, ICBMs, and nuclear-powered submarines. These advancements made the threat of nuclear war more real, but also acted as a deterrent, as neither side could afford to risk total destruction. The arms race was not just about weapons but also about technological and scientific superiority. Both the United States and the Soviet Union sought to demonstrate their technological prowess, not only in terms of military capability but also through the development of space exploration. This was part of the broader space race that unfolded alongside the arms race. The launch of Sputnik by the Soviet Union in 1957 shocked the world and signaled that the USSR had achieved a significant technological milestone. This event galvanized the US to invest heavily in its own space program, leading to the establishment of NASA and the eventual success of landing a man on the Moon in 1969. While space exploration was not directly tied to the arms race, it was seen as a measure of a nation's technological and scientific power, contributing to the Cold War rivalry between the two superpowers. The development of missile technology for space exploration also had military applications, further intertwining the space race with the larger context of the Cold War arms race. As the Cold War continued, the United States and the Soviet Union sought ways to control the ever-growing arsenal of nuclear weapons through a series of arms control agreements. Despite the constant buildup of military power, both sides recognized the existential risk posed by the vast number of nuclear weapons they had developed. The threat of nuclear annihilation was ever present, leading to the realization that some form of arms control was necessary to prevent catastrophic consequences. The first significant attempt at arms control came with the signing of the Partial Test Ban Treaty in 1963, which banned nuclear tests in the atmosphere, underwater, and in outer space. This treaty was a critical step in reducing the environmental and health impacts of nuclear testing, while also signaling a willingness on both sides to begin addressing the dangers of nuclear weapons. The most prominent arms control agreements between the US and the Soviet Union, however, were the Strategic Arms Limitation Talks, SALT, that took place during the 1970s. These talks were aimed at curbing the number of nuclear weapons both superpowers had deployed. SALT-I, signed in 1972, resulted in the Anti-Ballistic Missile (ABM) Treaty and an agreement to limit the number of ICBMs each side could deploy. While SALT-I was an important first step, it was seen as a temporary measure. Both nations were still developing new and more powerful nuclear weapons, and the arms race continued to escalate despite the agreements. SALT-II, signed in 1979, sought to further limit the number of nuclear warheads and delivery systems, but the treaty was never ratified by the U.S. Senate due to the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan later that year, which led to increased tensions. During the Cold War, the arms race had far-reaching impacts beyond the direct competition between the superpowers. It influenced global security policies, especially as smaller nations sought to align themselves with either the US or the Soviet Union. Countries that were caught in the middle of the Cold War often had to choose sides, knowing that their decisions would affect their security and future. In some cases, nations opted to pursue their own nuclear capabilities in response to the growing tension. The most notable example of this is the spread of nuclear weapons to other countries. The US and the Soviet Union both sought to limit the spread of nuclear technology through the Non-Proliferation Treaty (NPT) of 1968, which aimed to prevent the development of nuclear weapons by other nations while promoting peaceful uses of nuclear energy. However, the NPT's success was limited, as several countries, including China, India, and Pakistan, developed their own nuclear weapons, leading to further concerns about global security. In addition to nuclear weapons, the Cold War arms race also saw significant advancements in conventional military technology. Both the US and the Soviet Union invested heavily in modernizing their military forces, developing more sophisticated aircraft, tanks, and naval vessels. The development of stealth technology and precision-guided munitions by the United States in the 1980s was a direct response to the increasing effectiveness of Soviet military hardware.